So people move here from other parts of the country that have beautiful long summers and they think it is too hot. There's no way I can grow a garden here. And they plant their tomatoes at the same time that they planted them when they lived, wherever. After Mother's Day, you plant your tomatoes. If you do that here, those tomatoes are gonna die and they're gonna think they're a bad gardener. They're not a bad gardener. They just planted at the wrong time. Just because it's hot here doesn't mean we can't garden. We have several months of beautiful weather that are ideal gardening conditions for so many crops. You just have to know when to plant them. So the wonderful thing about gardening in Arizona is that we can garden year-round. But the difficult thing about gardening in Arizona is that we garden year-round, and there's really no break in it. So I feel like my beds are always in some state of transition, and I've just had to kind of lean into that and be okay with that. There's always something being planted, but there's always something being harvested too. Part of me wants to say, okay, it's in a transition phase right now, it's transition, but then I realized my garden is always in transition. Because we can garden year round here, that means that there's always something getting harvested, there's always seeds that are planting, there's always something I can be doing. And so part of gardening in a year-round climate is just taking a step and taking a minute and really being thoughtful about what's next. This bed is a great example of a lot of different things that are going on. I've got a pepper plant here. If it's put on any, oh yeah, it's got some peppers going. And pepper plants will live year round, which I love. And then I've got basil, again, warm season crop. This is amaranth, which will have edible leaves, beautiful flowers, and grain as well. So this one does triple duty here in my garden, and it loves the heat. So I'm always looking for things that don't mind the heat, that can grow well in the summer, and there's so many different options that you really can. If you want to garden year-round, you can. This bed is a good example of overplanting. I have big ideas and don't always think about how big the plants are gonna get. So roselle is another plant that loves the heat. It's in the okra family. This plant's gonna grow up really large, which I love. And then we've got lots of basil all around, which is a hot season plant. You can see these flowers forming. The bees love it. Got some tomatoes that I thought would be done, but because we've had such a mild spring, they're still growing strong. So this roselle is gonna grow up and probably shade out some of these lower plants, and that's okay. But for now, pollinators love it. It's nice and full. This is chayote squash. This is my, I want to say, third or fourth attempt, and so far it's my best attempt. We've gotten the furthest. So it's been tricky to grow. It doesn't like the cold and it doesn't like the heat, but because of our mild spring, we're doing okay. I haven't seen any blossoms yet, but supposedly they're really prolific. I just think we get a little bit too hot here to grow them successfully, but I'm not gonna give up quite yet. I'm gonna see if we can get some fruit off of this vine. So some of my earliest memories were helping both of my grandmas, one in Idaho, one in Indiana, in their garden. I remember planting flowers with my grandma in Idaho, and then also visiting my grandma in Indiana and my grandpa in their huge farm in Indiana. You could get lost in all of the vegetables. I remember harvesting lima beans and telling her how much I hated lima beans. I would not eat them. But then when she cooked them, I was like, oh wait, this doesn't taste like lima beans. These are delicious. They're actually really good. So just those memories of spending time in both of their gardens stuck with me. We moved here to Arizona in 2008 and I finally had room for a garden. So I started small and loved it. It's in my blood. For a while, it was all I could think about, what I could plant, and I added in a couple of garden beds and I've been gardening ever since, and the garden's been expanding ever since. It's all about feeding your soil, not necessarily feeding your plants. So when you're applying a lot of chemical fertilizers, that might give your plants a short-term benefit, but in the long run, it doesn't really help your soil. So when I'm gardening, I am really focused on how can I improve my soil, how can I help my soil. I don't use a lot of fertilizers in my garden, but the one thing I do have is a vermicomposting bin in every bed. A vermicomposting bin is basically a place for worms to compost. The worms break those food scraps down into worm castings, which is basically gold for your garden. It's the best kind of fertilizer there is. A lot of people think that maybe worms are going to eat the vegetables in my beds or eat the roots of the plants, and it couldn't be further from the truth.